spectacle. Apparently didn't bring the crowds out. Huh?
Yeah, I know.
Not yet. You're too busy.
That was a good idea, telling him the meeting was at the library, though. No, the Kelly Street Park. That's the one with the chain link fence and the excavators around it.
What a bargain at only $400,000.
The whole enchilada. But I heard they're gonna have a fountain too, right?
Oh, that's a great
We're gonna get
idea.
the
We're not
water.
going to provide them water, are we?
Yeah.
No, we'll give him.
Okay, we got,
I hope it's
let's just a matter of
self-contained
seconds.
Recirculated.
with no automatic fill devices.
Okay, guys,
Have an autofill, but it's
it
not
is
like-
7 o'clock Apple time. Yeah, it is. Roll call, please.
Sure. Director Coverdell?
Here,
Vice President Glassberg?
Here.
Director Reynolds?
I'm here.
Director Flint?
Here.
President Michelson?
I'm here, and for those of you interested, today is Tuesday, April 14th, and we'll rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Watch your head there.
Apparently, we have
the TV and I are bonding.
no public comment. Maybe they're holding it for next meeting. Okay. That said, whose month was it to review claims?
It was mine.
And how did they appear?
I reviewed them and found them all in order.
Good, thank you. Do we have a motion to pass the consent as a whole, or any item need to be discussed?
I'm happy to make a motion to pass the consent calendar as presented.
Okay, moved and seconded. John, please.
Yes. Director Coverdell?
Aye.
Vice President Glassberg?
Aye.
Director Reynolds?
Aye.
Director Flint?
Aye.
President Michelson?
Aye, thank you. Meetings attended, and director comments?
I did a little snow research. It was horrible. 2/3 of the place I went didn't have enough snow to even open, and they'd already sent everyone home.
Yeah, I know. Squaw closes 19th this weekend.
It's this weekend, yeah.
Bear Valley.
Kirkwood, are they still open?
No, this weekend.
Oh, so everybody, it's over.
Yeah, Bear Valley closed Sunday.
Yeah, so it's pretty bleak out there, as I'm sure everyone knows who pays attention or has a radio or a television. Yeah, more to come on that. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I attended a State of the Water meeting in Sacramento, and I think some of the things everyone here would be up to speed on, which is drought issues and concerns with that. Lester Snow presented, he's the former head of Water Control Board, and he presented a stunning information on the groundwater overdraft and the San Joaquin Valley having lost over 100 feet in 1 year, so that some of their aquifers are now down 600 feet, which just floored me. I've never heard of having an overdraft, water mining 100 feet in 1 year. So that was really significant, and their pitch on this was that the groundwater rule will roll into play very fast and very hard because of that. There was a lot of talk about the groundwater pumping in San Joaquin. The one part that I wanted to share with the group, because it totally took me by surprise, oh yeah, this was the other part of that, 2 million acre feet of overdraft in the Central Valley. And 700,000 acres of land would need to be fallowed to balance the water deficit from where they're at. And so I found those numbers absolutely stunning. And so, as you know, as our group knows, the Coastside is not part of this critical groundwater basin, but it sounds like the criticalness of the groundwater basin is much worse than I had realized. So that was really sobering. The one other thing that came up that really took me by surprise, I was unprepared for this, and I'll share it because everybody in the group was adamant that this will have a major impact on us, meaning the Northern California water users, and that is that as part of this state of the state water situation, the Salton Sea got put up as a flaming issue. And basically what they came at was that the Salton Sea, the water rights from the Colorado River that maintain the Salton Sea are expiring in 2017. And they've been putting significant volumes of water into the Salton Sea to maintain it. Those water rights stop in 2017, and thus the Salton Sea will start receding, shoreline, reduction, because it's a desert and it wasn't supposed to be a sea. So that leaves the only inflow, the farmer's runoff, which is a very toxic brew of stuff, and the geothermal discharge, which makes the farmer's discharge look like potable drinking water. And the part that came up in this whole discussion is the air quality problems from the Salton Sea will make San Diego non-habitable. And so therefore, Northern California will have to figure out a way to put water into the Salton Sea, because otherwise the city of San Diego becomes uninhabitable. And I gotta tell you, I was...
From the dust from the dry lake bed?
Yeah, from the dry lake bed. And so I was really blindsided by this. This was just like, what? And I can't think of a worse time for anybody to bring this whole conversation up. It's like, wait a minute, we don't have enough water for ourselves, and you're trying to tell me you want us to allocate water to maintain an artificial lake in a dry desert dust bed. However, there were 7 people on the panel. All 7 were unanimous. They all came from different viewpoints. It was supposed to be a balanced panel, and all 7 said, this is a crisis that will impact the entire state, and it absolutely will be a statewide issue. There were 2 people there from the feds, and they felt pretty strongly it was going to be a federal level issue. I'll be really honest, this totally caught me as really? This is our problem?
Why is it different? The entire Coachella Valley is a dry desert. So what are they saying? That it's going to make that much difference? There's going to be that much more dust residue?
Yeah, so that was the first question that everybody asked, was give me a break. We got lots of valleys. How, why would this suddenly make San Diego uninhabitable? And they had basically 3 explanations. One was that Owens Lake was the poster child for terrible air quality when that lake was dried up. So there's a lot learned about airborne dust. And there's a lot learned about how you can't control it by typical methods, inexpensive methods. Then the next thing that came up was the 60 years of putting water and silt and runoff from the geothermal discharges and the farm discharges have changed the nature of the soil, and even the receding, what I call a bathtub ring, or the areas that they've dewatered already, have caused massive problems with dust already. And they're saying this is going to go up exponentially. So their message was very strongly that this will be a state, if not federal, crisis. And I bring that to the group because it was not on my radar in any way, shape, or form.
It's an interesting that you bring that up, because I was just down there last week in Palm Springs, and I don't typically have a conversation about the Salton Sea when I'm down there visiting friends, but it did come up, but not for that reason. It came up because of the fact that it is shrinking, and they didn't mention the water rights thing, but it had to do with the migratory patterns of birds, and they were concerned about how if the Salton Sea dries up, the migratory patterns will change. That seemed to be the issue.
So
Never heard of this issue.
The federal, and this was another part, one of the panelists was a federal representative who was speaking about the federal bird habitat restoration program, and that was one of those train wrecks that basically they're fighting a losing battle. They're trying to make artificial wetlands to save the birds. It's killing the birds. It's just insane. And, I think all of us just sort of felt uncomfortable after hearing how bad that program's going. So,
Stay tuned on that one.
yeah, so
Thanks.
sorry for the bad news.
Anyone else have anything a little more cheerful?
Sure, yeah.
To share? Otherwise, we can move on to general business.
Speaking of cheerful, oh,
Well, we're gonna take all our money in Las Vegas, right, and put it on black? Trying to offset this rate increase? Is that what we're gonna do?
This resolution is simply housekeeping to notify local agency investment fund of the folks authorized to make deposits and withdrawals on behalf of the district. This is not the district's investment policy, it's just housekeeping with LAIF.
Move to approve the resolution, 2015-04.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Oh, let's do roll call. It's a resolution. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Director Coverdale?
great idea, Joanne. Aye.
Vice President Glassberg?
Aye.
Aye.
Director Rose? Director Flynn?
Aye.
President Michelson?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Now we get to the fun part. Quarterly financial review.
Okay, so for the 9 months ended March 31st, we're down on revenue 611,000 or 9%, and that's offset by our non-operating revenue where we had additional one-time revenue. So our revenue is under budget right now, 392,000. And then our operating expenses are below budget. So to date, we are 239,000 under budget, under our net income, what we planned. So we have made up our shortfall in revenue, but not all of it. We expect to end the year 633,000 below plan on revenue, offset by some, pickup on the non-operating side. And we'll also, we also plan to be under on our operating expenses, 179,000. So we'll end the year 212,000 below what we budgeted for net income.
Looking for good news anywhere I can find it. Weren't we anticipating about an $800,000 shortfall?
Yes, so
in
it's
revenue?
better, I think this is better news than we had before. We were looking at, based early in the year, we were thinking we'd fall short by something like 800,000.
Yeah, so.
So it'll be, that number's down considerably.
Yeah, and so we're going to be down 392,000 in our reserves, which is made up of the 212,000 shortfall and then additional contribution to CIP.
So the water sales shortfall is less than we thought it would be, and we're doing a little bit better than plan on non-operating revenue, and we've underspent our expense budget.
But we're still dipping into reserves.
We're
too.
still dipping in.
So it's not like it's all coming from somewhere else.
No.
We're just shifting it from one account to another to make up the difference. Still better than $1 million.
Yes.
Which, that was the first number I heard.
Right.
Much better than that.
Any other directors have any questions or comments on this? None?
I was wondering, we have a water conservation officer, do we need a water sales officer?
Yeah, I think
I just wondered if we needed to play.
That's Mary and me, we're constantly arguing, yeah.
Just wondered if we needed to play both sides of that.
Yeah, they gang up on me.
Turn on those sprinklers.
yeah, okay, well, no, thank you for pointing out that it was looking much worse earlier on, so that's there is some good news in the bad news, so thank you for pointing that out. And the governor's executive order, I want to talk about that a little bit. Are there any updates on that?
So I have a
How's it-
slide on the desktop.
Oh, okay. Emergency regulation,
Yeah.
that's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Just got the channel changer.
Just hit the little, put your finger right there. Cool. Every time I try to use the remote, I turn one off and one on. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Thumb's so much more effective than the finger.
Okay, so, well, there's been a lot of action over the last 30 days as far as emergency regulations, and there's more to come. It's still happening as we speak. I thought I'd start the presentation with just a little background. I'll go through it really quick, just to put perspective in where we've been. We've actually, starting in October of 2013, the district implemented stage 1 of its water shortage contingency plan, and that's called the Water Shortage Advisory. And then in January of 2014, SFPUC asked for voluntary conservation from both retail customers and the wholesale customers. And so that prompted us to go to the board and ask for a 10% voluntary conservation from our customers in February of 2014. Let's see. So then the next step was in July, that summer of 2014, as the drought worsened, the State Water Resources Control Board did something that it's never done before and adopted emergency regulations mandating urban water suppliers to take action, and that became effective after it went through, I guess it's the administrative law review or something, on July 28th. So the state board's action then prompted the district on August 12th to implement stage 2 of its water shortage contingency plan, which we call the Water Shortage Emergency Warning, and to adopt an ordinance, 2014-02, to establish mandatory water use restrictions and prohibitions. So the summary of that, I'll just give just a really quick, brief summary of the ordinance that we passed. And there is a fact sheet available in the front desk area there if anyone wants more detail. But in that ordinance, we limited irrigation to late evening, early morning hours so that people weren't irrigating during the heat of the day or when it's very windy, to try to make it a little bit more efficient for the spray irrigation. Irrigation runoff was prohibited, hosing down driveways and sidewalks was prohibited, requiring the use of a shutoff device on a garden hose was required, and then the state required water agencies to do monthly reporting to the board on our production and on our residential sales, and they were comparing that to our 2013 production and sales. So we've been doing that. So some of the new developments that have happened since March 17th. So basically, due to worsening condition of the state water supplies and drought conditions, the state board determined that further action was needed to conserve water supplies and to prepare for another year of drought, because they're anticipating that there's a lot of talk that this is going to be our mega drought, a multi-year drought, more like Australia had, where they had a 10-year drought. So the state board on March 17th adopted new regulations that extended the current regulations that they had passed in 2014, and also expanded on those with new prohibitions and restrictions. And these extended and expanded regulations became effective on March 27th. So a brief summary of those expanded regulations that are on top of the existing ones. So restaurants are prohibited from serving water unless requested by the customer. Hotels must provide guests the option of choosing not to have their linens and towels laundered daily. Irrigation is prohibited during and after 48 hours of measurable precipitation. And they didn't define measurable precipitation. That's up to each water agency. So we're working on that. And then water agencies must limit days per week that irrigation is allowed. And that's correlated to each agency's water shortage contingency plan. So if it's not specifically called out in your water shortage contingency plan, the state wants you to limit it to 2 days per week. And that's what would apply to us in our case. And then they also expanded the mandatory reporting requirements. So it looks like they're going to be asking us for more information. So besides production, besides residential use, they're going to expand into what we call CII, or commercial, industrial, institutional use. So that'll, not quite sure how that'll look, but we will have to report on that. So after the state took their action in March, the governor kind of surprised us on April 1st, or at least it surprised me. And he issued an executive order. And in his executive order, he basically required the state board to develop regulations that achieve a 25% statewide reduction in water use. And he also said in that executive order that the state board has to take into consideration an agency's current usage, or GPCD, gallons per day per capita. And so we're not exactly sure how that's going to look, but that was the direction to the state board. His executive order also had specific restrictions or prohibitions, and one of them was that irrigation of ornamental turf on public street medians is prohibited. So, and that's public streets. So, could not think of any median within our service area that's public that has turf, ornamental turf in it. So, I'm not sure how that would apply to ours. I mean, there's planted medians, but not with lawn or turf. And then there's some within private HOAs that have turf, but they're not public. So he also basically said irrigation with potable water outside of new construction that's for commercial and residential that is not delivered by drip or micro spray is prohibited. So basically he's prohibiting spray irrigation on new construction. So that's something we'll have to work with the city and county on implementing for new construction. And the new regulations, so basically the governor directed different agencies, state agencies, including the State Water Board, to implement these regulations, the directives in the executive order into regulations, and that's what the state board is doing now. And the state board expects that the rulemaking will be finished, then they'll have something adopted by May 5th, May 6th timeframe. So we're kind of in limbo right now to see how the executive order is going to be implemented by the state Water Resources Control Board. So these are some of the things that we don't know and why we're kind of in this limbo state. Again, we don't know how the how the state board is going to implement that 25% statewide reduction. They did come out with a draft proposed regulatory framework, and they were asking for comments on that. And in that framework, they had, and it made a lot of news, so I think everyone's seen it, is they came out with a table, and they listed the water agency according to their residential GPCD. And we came out in the 10% tier. So, which was the lowest tier. So if they keep that structure, which is questionable, they might not keep it, but if they keep it, then it looks like we would be asked to basically conserve 10% over 2013 production and usage. So we'll see how that plays out. let's see, then some of the other things we don't know is there's not a lot of clarity on how the regulations will impact commercial, industrial, and institutional customers. In the executive order, it specifically called out golf courses, cemeteries, and campuses. So, you know, we could have slightly different rules for those sectors in the commercial. And the other question we don't know is how, we know that we're going to have to report on this, they call it CII sector usage, but we don't know how that's going to look and how much we have to break it down. So that's kind of important for reporting. So the next steps, basically, April 15th is an important deadline because that's when we hear from from SFPUC on the next water supply conditions. Then on May 6th, that's when we expect to hear from the state board on how they're going to implement the regulations. And then after we know that, then staff can come back to the board with a new ordinance on how to implement the new regulations. I'd prefer to do it. We could have brought an ordinance this meeting and then amended it in May when we found out more, but staff thought that it would be better just to bring one ordinance and make all the changes at once. Be a little bit less confusing for the public too. So, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, you commented that you don't think the draft proposed proportionment will stand. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on that. I know that Bosca made some comments on that tiered structure and recommended some changes to it. Bosca's recommendations wouldn't affect us. It would have kept us still in that 10%. But so I don't know how other agencies and environmental groups and have commented on the regulations. The state board's going to have to take all that into account. So they may change the tiers and the cutoffs. They said they were actively looking for comments, and if an agency had a better way to implement this and meet the 25% statewide, they were open to hearing it. But they wanted something that was easy to implement, that was understandable, that was fair. So that's why I'm not sure, depending on the comments and how the state board interprets them, it could change a bit. Their structure matches really well what the state said at the State of the Water address, which was there's huge variations in supply and in use in California, and I do think that we are duly recognized that we aren't one of the large water users here, and there are districts that are using very high levels of water. So it seemed like the fairest way I could see to do it is say, yeah, people are using the most can cut back.
Right, and I think that was the intent of the governor's order, but you just not quite sure how it'll end up after.
Well, as we've read in the newspaper, there's a lot of pushback. People don't want their lawns to go brown.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do this statewide and try to have the same rules across the state. But the state board's perspective is much longer. They're not just looking at the next year. I think their perspective is years out, and that and then even if it was a normal precipitation or snowfall year, this coming up, we're so much in the hole as far as supply, and like you mentioned earlier, our groundwater tables, that it would take us years of above normal precipitation to try to get back to what we consider normal. So that's what this what the state is looking at.
Anyone else have any comments?
Lawn be gone. Time to ramp up our program, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in it. It's not an easy program to apply for and complete. And Bosca is already trying to make changes to it. It has opened up the discussion with the water agencies to how we can change it. But it's very difficult because these rebates tend to be big money, and then it takes a while to implement once you approve it. So there is discussion about it, but I'm not sure how it's going to actually turn out.
Well, thank you for that. And, the media has been very good source of information. So that our customer base, they're getting information as quickly as we are. I mean, sometimes I learn from Channel 2 in the morning now. Watch tomorrow, they'll tell you, what SFPUC says. Before I get an email from Bosca, I will see it on the news. So our customers are very well informed. Certainly, New York Times has been following this, had a really great interactive map, and I think we should be really proud we're amongst the lowest of the low in per person per day use, and we all should be proud of that. And I hope that does really warrant at the end of the day that a tier 1, because if any district deserves it, we certainly deserve it. We have been very, very frugal with our water. So thank you for that report, and we shall see how this develops. Thanks. And next item.
Okay, next item is the amended fiscal year 2015-2016 budget process timeline. We keep revising this, and we present it at each meeting. The significant change we formalize here is that we'll have a special meeting at the end of June, and we'd like to poll the board for availability on June 30th. We think that would be the best date to have that meeting if everyone is available. It would be the last possible date before the new rates go into effect on July 1st. And it's, I think, 46 days from May 15th, which is the day we would mail out the Prop 218 notices. That gives us usually takes us a couple of days to get the Prop 218 notices out after the May 12th board meeting. So June 30th would be tentatively the time when we would schedule the public hearing. The board will do that formally at the May 12th meeting. We'll ask the board to approve the 218 notice and formally schedule the public hearing. So if there's anybody who would not be available on June 30th, let us know.
It's looking okay for me.
Okay. That's the day we'll focus on.
Okay.
So, and at the May 12th meeting, we will, that's when the board will approve the rate increase to be included in the 218 notice, which is, as always, the maximum rate increase the board could approve following the public hearing.
Are we thinking an early afternoon meeting, or?
I think we would recommend an evening meeting. I think
June 30th, or the June 30th?
Yeah, the June.
Yeah, I think
June
we'd
30th.
have to have evening.
We want to make sure that
Public,
anybody
yeah.
who wants to come and comment can get here. Even the folks who work over the hill and couldn't get here for an afternoon meeting.
Good, okay. We're on.
Did you want us to tell you if we're available now or
Sure.
later? Yeah, I'm available.
Yeah.
Right.
That was easy.
Saves the emails. Thank you. Next item.
Okay, here we are back talking about the budget. We met with the Finance Committee yesterday afternoon, so we called a meeting of the Finance Committee to talk about some new developments on the budget, actually, not within the budget, but looking at the overall rate increase and possible ways of structuring the rate increase, and that's what we'd like to talk with you about tonight. So, as usual in developing our budget, we have to make assumptions based on what we know right now, and we start in January, February, and the conditions in January and February kind of become the basis for the budget. Well, I think as Kathleen's presentation made clear, things are really changing rapidly for us. And, the budget is sort of a snapshot. The assumptions in the budget are sort of a snapshot. And as things change rapidly around us, we're looking at those assumptions critically, and that's what we've been doing since our work session on March 31st. The very next day, we were all surprised by the governor's executive order. He was standing out in the bare field where they usually do the snow survey and find 4 feet of snow, and I think the executive order was an unprecedented and very significant action. As Kathleen pointed out, we don't quite know what the consequences of that will be, but we know it will be less water. It'll be less water use, and the pressure to use less water seems to have increased significantly from before the governor's executive order. We've been identified as being in the Tier 1 conservation standard group. There are only 18 out of about 400 water agencies in California that fall in that group. The conservation standard is 10%, but we don't really know what that means. We may be there already, or very close to being there already, but we don't know what the regulations are going to look like. There's some talk that certain classes of users, turf waterers basically, could be targeted for greater cutbacks. We don't know whether 10% overall is our target or 10% residential. So those are questions that remain to be answered, and the answers all tend to suggest that our sales will be lower than we thought they would be when we developed the budget. So there are a lot of questions. Cemeteries and golf courses, for instance, we have 2 customers, one cemetery and one golf course, whose water use represents 12% of our total water use. So, and a greater percentage than that of our total revenue. So obviously, the regulations imposed on those classes of users are going to be very important to us. We still don't know what's going to happen. We do know that there'll be a mandatory 2-day irrigation restriction. Don't know how that will affect water use. We have never tried it before. We'll be required to notify customers of leaks, and we have to report on compliance and enforcement. So those are the things we do know. And some of the things that we might have previously regarded as temporary now look permanent. I think a lot of the changes that are being put into place now will be permanent. Once you start reporting something to the state, they're very unlikely to ever say, well, you don't have to report it anymore. So I think a lot of these things are going to be permanent. So we talked about budget risks in our work session, and the one we've really been fretting and losing sleep about is our projection of water sales, which was, for the purposes of the budget, 590 million gallons. That's down from that would be down from our projected fiscal 15 year-end sales of 620 million gallons. Fiscal 14, we sold about 690. Is that the right number? About
697.
690, yeah. So our sales are dropping. We'd assumed in our budgeting that from fiscal 15 that we'd drop about another 5%. But it seems like that could be higher, and I think we're more worried about that risk from April 2nd than we were on March 31st, and I guess on April 1st. And there's been some people have asked whether the governor's announcement was an April Fool's joke, but we have not given that any. We haven't really given that any thought. We think it's real. And then, as I indicated, there's been some talk of more focus on turf in golf courses and cemeteries. That would be a very significant budget risk for us. And then, for the most part, everyone's believing that this drought isn't going to end anytime soon. One winter of normal rainfall wouldn't really relieve the drought. So things aren't, there's no promise of things getting better in the near future. And on the other hand, it seems pretty likely that the restrictions will increase. And if SFPUC, the ultimate for us would be if San Francisco goes to a mandatory allocation scheme by declaring a water shortage emergency and cutting back the supply. If they cut back by 20%, we would have to reduce our production to about 475 million gallons. That's assuming we don't have, that our local sources are contributing really minimally. And at that level of production, assuming that we only lose about 7% of our water as non-revenue water, we'd have about 445 million gallons in sales. So, I mean, that's a number that's just unbelievably low. It's not just a low sales number, but it will be very challenging to achieve that level of demand reduction. And we're assuming that if San Francisco put mandatory allocations in place, that use over the allocation would subject us to significant excess use charges. Last time around, in the 90s, the excess use charge for 100 to 110% of allocation was 2 times the wholesale rate, and over 110, I think, was 7 times the. I might have the windows a little bit wrong. It might have been over 120%, but the maximum excess use charge was 7 times the wholesale rate. So it doesn't take very long, if you can't manage your demand, to run up a really large bill with those kinds of excess use charges. Nobody, SFPUC, nobody among the wholesale customers wants to go to this kind of a mandatory regime. If there's any good news in the restrictions imposed by the state, it's that we think they may make mandatory restrictions by San Francisco less likely by continuing to drive usage in the San Francisco system down. But all of these are big risks. We tried to attach some numbers to these risks. Water sales going down to 560 would impact us by about 400,000. So for every 30 or 40 million gallons we go down, we'd go down by around 500,000. We assumed in our budget that our non-revenue water is about 6.6%. I think that may be a little bit optimistic. The most recent numbers suggest non-revenue water is more like 10%. So if it really is 10%, that's a $110,000 hit. And it's difficult to get good resolution on that. That's one of the things we're focusing on now with a consulting contract that still has a few months to go. Increased reliance on San Francisco water over what we've assumed would also excuse me, subject us to significant additional costs. If we lost 50% of our district-owned water, if we only had half the productivity we've assumed, that would be $250,000 in additional cost for San Francisco water. And then should we be unable to take the assumed amount of water from Pilarcitos, either because we have problems with our temporary pipeline or because there's just not enough rain for us to get water out of Pilarcitos, that's another $90,000. So
Dave, does San Francisco move from Pilarcitos to Crystal Springs? Do they move the water out of, or do we have exclusive use of
move it.
Pilarcitos?
that's an excellent question. Our water sales contract with San Francisco, which is our individual agency agreement with SFPUC, says that they will operate the Pilarcitos system primarily for our benefit. But we really have no leverage to do anything if they fail to do that. And they can run water out of Pilarcitos for their own reasons. In fact, we wanted to use Pilarcitos last fall, and they dropped the level by about 10 feet, ran the water down San Mateo Creek, and it goes into San Andreas Reservoir, I think. So they try to work with us, but they have their own agenda, their own needs, and that may lead them to diminish the supply available to us from Pilarcitos, and we have no real recourse. You know, we just say, well, okay, we'll use Crystal Springs. So, but there are a number of ways that could be reduced. So the overall picture is, you know, we're trying to think of what are the opportunities, and, you know, we're coming up a little bit short on, you know, what the upsides are. There's in these budget assumptions and in the current environment, we just see quite a bit of risk, and this discussion of risk, you know, relates to. We'll bring it back ultimately to the rate increase, just so you know where we're going. So this is Mary's slide. I'll let her about it. How bad could it get?
Or I call it "Don't kill the messenger" slide. But what I attempted to do with the slide is to show what our budget would, how our budget would be impacted at various levels of water sales. So the first column, 590, represents our current budget. Also with the rate increase, we put in a placeholder of 27%. So you'll see that in this situation, we have a contribution to CIP and reserves of $1,866,000. So if we would go down to 560, our contribution to CIP and reserves would go down about $365,000. So and if you're looking at, you know, as Dave mentioned, between the 590 and 560, I mean, we're talking, you could talk, if you, for residential, if you went down another 5% from our budget in terms of sales, that's about 16 million gallons. So when you start talking, you know, difference between 30 million, of another 30 million between residential and irrigation, you could get there. So, you know, this is could be a possibility. I also wanted to show a worst case scenario. If we're getting down to close to being on allocations, our revenue would decrease, you know, 1.6 million. I mean, we would definitely be, you know, down to, you know, where we wouldn't be having any contribution to reserves, and we wouldn't be covering our, you know, our debt covenants. So, and this, I hate to keep saying it's not, it's worst case, but it could get, the numbers could get even worse, because San Francisco, they would likely increase our rates as well, because the rates to us are fixed largely to cover debt service. So, you know, we may not even get the 300 remaining off of that 475. So it's pretty dire looking if we had to go to that situation.
What we've realized is that San Francisco water costs, which we tend to think of as variable, use less water, pay less, are not really variable. If we're going down along with everybody else, then San Francisco, our water rates will go up in direct proportion. So there may be a bit of a lag, but San Francisco's revenue requirement, like ours, is largely fixed. Well, theirs is even more fixed than ours. It's half debt service. So, when we say, well, if we went down to 475, we think that SFPUC water would drop 300,000. That may not be the case. So, our cost really, that biggest component of our cost, which you might think, because it's on a per unit basis, is fixed, is variable, is not really variable if everybody's going down. Now, if we use our local sources to reduce our use of San Francisco water and nobody else is going down, then it is a variable cost. We would pay less in proportion. But we're just coming to that really, where are our variable costs? Well, there really aren't any. Things that are classically considered variable costs tend to be, because they're water rates, that San Francisco is going to come back and collect whatever shortfall in revenue they experience.
How fast can San Francisco change their rates? Do they have to go through the same Prop 218 process?
No, they don't. They do not have to go, well, for wholesale customers. For retail customers, yes, they do have to go through Prop 218. For wholesale customers, no. They have certain obligations under the water supply agreement that I think they may be different in a drought emergency. They have, if they want to change the rate structure from what it has been, they have some hoops they have to jump through. They have to provide us with some notice and some analysis. But basically, I'd have to look at the water supply agreement. I can't remember what the minimum notice requirement is, but it's not very long. It's with 30 or 60 days. Within 30 or 60 days, if there's some kind of an emergency, they can put new rates in place. And they certainly, if they declare a water shortage emergency, would have to change the rates. A lot of their concerns are like ours. They want to maintain enough reserves to deal with whatever may happen.
So there's a possibility they could raise the rates this September.
Yes. They can, San Francisco can do whatever it feels it needs to do whenever they feel they need to do it, essentially. They're always looking out for the health and welfare of the overall regional water system, and if they think there's something that requires them to act, then they will act. They can. Talking further about sales and about trends in our sales and how our various classes of customers contribute to our total sales, this is kind of an interesting graph that looks back about 10 years. And these are 12-month rolling averages of monthly sales in these categories. So they kind of damp out the cycle. The 12-month rolling average kind of damps out cycle-to-cycle variations. And you can see the top four lines are irrigation, agriculture, commercial, and hotels, motels. So it's clear that over the long term, if you just look at these lines, irrigation has increased. And agriculture over the long term has decreased. Agriculture, the biggest customers in agriculture are Bay City Flowers and Rocket Farms, the former Nurseryman's Exchange. So the significant thing to notice about this is if you look at just about every class over the last few years since 2013, there hasn't been much reduction. In fact, some increases. We'll show you some more detail. There's been some decrease over time in commercial. That may be a result of I think it's probably a result of better efficiencies and motivated by our increasing rates. But this gives you an idea of the relative contributions of these various classes, and when we think about risk, it's a 10% change in irrigation or agriculture has a big impact on us. Doesn't, a 10% change in some of these other classes where, the average monthly usage may be 1 million gallons, won't have a big effect on our water supply or on our revenues. So it's really important what happens in some of these classes.
Can you explain the difference between irrigation and agriculture?
Well, irrigation is, Kathleen can prop me up here, irrigation is basically the golf course and the cemetery. Those two customers dominate irrigation. There's some other smaller ones that are classified as irrigation.
HOA,
dedicated
irrigation.
Right. And agriculture is basically the floriculture businesses. We have some small agricultural users, but there's no significant agricultural user other than our two big floriculture businesses. So, the shorthand is irrigation is the golf course and the cemetery, agriculture is Rocket Farms and Bay City Flowers. And then Mary did some of these nice charts that show the trends since 2013, and 2013 is the base year for the state's conservation standards. These may not correspond exactly to how the state looks at data, but I think they're a good way of looking at our data. And the real message of the data here, I can summarize it, is that residential conservation has really carried the district in terms of meeting any kind of reduction goals. We asked our customers to voluntarily conserve 10%, and they've done that and more. So the response of our customers to our request for conservation, our residential customers who represent, we've got about 5,300 residential accounts for about 60% of our water use and about the same proportion of our revenue. So we're a majority residential district. Our residents have really stepped up. As of February, we were down 14% from a 2013 baseline, and that went down a little bit. That degree of conservation went down a little bit in March. We've had 3 pretty dry months beginning of the year and really warm weather, and everywhere that has resulted in higher water use. So then if you look at our aggregate non-residential sales, you can see that we're down a little bit, but still less than 4%. There have been some times when we were down. The trend overall, if you drew the best fit line, is down, but we're down. The reduction right now of the 12-month average, based on the 12-month average over the 12 months in 2013, is only about 4%. And the amount of water represented there is about 22 million gallons a month compared to 30 for residential. And this just breaks it down a little bit better. You can see irrigation. There's been, and if you go back to the charts with the multiple lines, irrigation was up. Agricultural water sales have trended down. That's probably a function of our high price as well as the business they're in. You can see that our commercial sector, commercial restaurants and hotels, if you lump all of those three together, that they only use about 7 million gallons a month. They've trended down, but you couldn't really say that our usage is down in those sectors. And then for other things, also the trend is down, but very low conservation. So overall, agriculture, which represents, agriculture is only about 5 million gallons a month. So overall residential is the story. Everything else is trending down, but we're not anywhere. If you're talking about even a 10% conservation goal, we're just right on, you know, on an aggregate basis, we're just right on the edge of that. And if you start talking about reductions beyond that, like 15% or 20%, we would have a long way to go, and that would have significant implications for our revenue, as well as for the cost of achieving those reductions. So that just gives you an idea of how much we're saving and where. The other part of the budget, I guess in terms of the expense budget, not much has changed, and the same would be true of the CIP budget. Again, our CIP, Capital Improvement Program budget, is a total of $34 million over its 10-year term. So an average of $3.4 million a year in 20. This is in 2015 dollars. The planned expenditure for fiscal 2016 is $4.4 million. So even though the average is 3.4, it's a little bit front-loaded, and that's pretty typical. And our current budget, with what we've called a 20% rate increase, assumes that we would finance $1.4 million out of operating revenue and borrow $3 million. So revenue, we call it revenue-funded CIP, would be $1.4 million. Borrowed debt-funded CIP would be $3 million, and then of the $1.8 million contribution, nominal contribution to capital and reserves, we would put $0.4 million in reserves to cover the fiscal year 2015 shortfall. So we're recommending borrowing $3 million for the highest priority projects, and the ones that are basically ready to, you know, in progress now, and we think will be ready to go in the next year or two. El Granada Pipeline Final Phase, formerly known as the Main Street Bridge Pipeline Project. This is a very important project and probably the most important one in the CIP at the moment. That represents about $2 million of the $3 million. Hopefully that number won't climb too far, but it could be higher. And the Denniston Booster Station and Bridgeport Drive pipeline are important investments that have such a compelling payback that it would make no sense to put them off. We're kind of doing some of those numbers. And the incremental water that could be produced at Denniston, assuming we get some rain, it's going to rain, it will rain again. And there will be water in Denniston.
Can we quote you on that?
Well, yes, you can.
With the date, with a specific date?
You can, I'll bet anything, it will rain again. And when it does, having the capacity that this project will provide has the potential to deliver, minimum $500,000 a year in SFPUC water cost savings. 1 million gallons of SFPUC water pumped from Crystal Springs now will cost us about a little bit over $5,000. These projects would increase the Denniston plant capacity by 500,000 gallons a day. So another 100 million gallons out of Denniston, which would be doable. And we could have produced a lot more water out of Denniston if we had had the capacity over the last 3 or 4 months. So these are very, you'd say, well, maybe we could defer these, but the first 1 year of delay of those projects could have an opportunity cost of $500,000. And the mortgage payment on a couple of, I think we have these in for 1.6, 2 million, or a couple $1 million. Mortgage payments would be $100,000 a year. So we'd make the mortgage payment after saving 20 million gallons. That'd be 5 weeks of operation at the higher capacity. So anyway, so those are, we talk about, well, how could we moderate the rate increase? And one of the things that we always talk about is, well, what CIP projects can we defer? Should we, push CIP projects out? And there may be some that for which that makes sense, but it doesn't seem like a great idea to plan on that basis, basically to use our CIP as sort of a rate stabilization fund, because we're not taking the projects off the schedule, they're just moving out, and they get more expensive, we lose the benefits. So, we're not, we can delay CIP projects, but the benefits may be questionable. So a lot of this discussion, a lot of our discussion of what we should do for the coming year is about, what do we produce for our reserves? How close to our costs should we run? Right now, our policy is to keep 15% of annual operating revenue in reserves. We've got about 2.7 million. Do I have that right? Mary will talk about this slide, but our policy is 15%. We think that's really low and provides the district with very little cushion. And do we have maybe we should give them the
Yeah.
handout so they don't have to struggle to, I'm sorry.
You have yours, right?
Yes, I do.
You can see this better in the handout.
I was curious, and so I pulled the audited financial statements for various districts to compare with our district to see what their unrestricted net position and their unrestricted cash was at their year end. So for last year, as of June 2014, our unrestricted net position was 2.3 million, and we had 2.1 million of unrestricted cash and 600,000 of restricted cash. So that, in looking at, one of the things I was looking at is what is the coverage for our operating expenses? So the last line shows that we're keeping about 3.7 months of cash on hand. So it's fairly, it's pretty tight. And as you start to look at the other districts, you can see that they're running, most are running at a lot higher numbers and have a lot more cash on hand. So it is a question of our reserves adequate, or I think we also need to keep in the back of our minds, do we have enough cash for a rainy day? Should we have, should some event happen?
A dry day.
Or dry day.
Rainy day is quite the right metaphor anymore. So all of these we have in mind as we thought about, we came in on March 31st saying we thought there was a solution below 20% that would make sense, and that involved deferring some capital projects. As we've thought, just as we've thought over the last few weeks about all of these risks that we've talked about and the level of our reserves, we're just really concerned about a strategy that doesn't allow some contribution to reserves as a cushion for a lot of uncertainty we face in the near term. And the 27% rate increase, again, contributes about 1.8 million to CIP and reserves. But after we do the CIP, only about 400,000 goes into reserves, which is about the equivalent of what we're drawing down this year to meet the shortfall in water revenue. So this is not a build up the reserves approach. It's more of a let's not let's not draw them down right now any further than absolutely necessary. So why do we think 27% is appropriate? That was kind of the top of our range when we talked on the 31st. Well, it fully funds operations and the revenue funded portion of the FY16 CIP, and it restores the funds drawn down this year to cover the shortfall in water sales. And I think most important, having reserves or some level of reserves improves our ability to absorb the kinds of near-term budget risks we've talked about. You know, there's a certain point, you know, if we, the risks can come at us faster than we're able to respond by borrowing money, and we may not be able to borrow money to cover some of these risks. You know, once we're not producing at the, you know, that 475 million gallon scenario, we're not producing enough revenue to even cover our costs. So nobody's going to loan us, and nobody's going to look at that and loan us money. So it would take us some time to recover from that. Over time, this will be a recurring theme you're going to hear. With the district needs to improve its levels of reserves, and that can only happen over time if we want to keep rate increases in an acceptable range and still do the capital projects necessary to responsibly maintain our infrastructure. So this is what our famous rate increase curve looks like. As usual, we have the two hockey sticks, one backwards and one frontwards. The rate increases will go down in the future, and the level of reserves will ultimately go up. And this level of rate increases assumes that we would borrow $3 million this year and $3 million next year to cover debt-funded CIP. If we don't do the borrowing, if we defer CIP projects that correspond to that borrowing, the picture doesn't change very much if we don't have to borrow. We're talking about that today. Some of these larger CIP projects that have some potential to delay, like the investment in San Vicente, for instance, that has some pretty significant permitting on the critical path, could push out. And those projects, because they're covered by borrowing, would have kind of a neutral effect on this picture, because the debt service for $3 million doesn't really push the green line up very much. So where would a 27% rate increase go? We've got about 9% would be going to the higher cost of SFPUC water, about 6% to our own drop in sales, and that's, again, that's at the 590 level. We've budgeted for water resources, demand management, basically getting ready for water shortage. We've talked about that there. That represents 4%. Just normal operating changes in operations and operating cost inflation, about 4%, and then making a contribution back to the reserves represents about 4% of that. So that's where you can see that I mean, everything but operating costs and inflation is drought related, or those the size of those pieces is drought related. The blue, the red, and the green. And there's not much we're able to do about the drought itself. So we'd like to follow up. So let's assume, for purpose of discussion, of course this is up to the board and you don't need to make a decision tonight. We'll come back come back in May and talk about this further. Assuming for the purposes of discussion that we do a 27% rate increase, we've been working with our rate consultants on alternatives for applying this across our rate structure. And one of the elements of the executive order is that urban water suppliers should develop rate structures to maximize water conservation. So this is a good time for us to reevaluate our rate structure. And it's something that every utility does on a regular basis. We haven't done it here since about, we had Bartle Wells look at our rate structure, I think it was in 2009 or so, and their conclusion was that it wasn't broken. We didn't need to do anything at that time. 2009 was before we experienced such a significant drop in our sales. So one of the conclusions of the analysis that our rate consultant has done is that we've outgrown our tier structure. The reason you have tiered rates is to provide a conservation signal. So the inclining tiers that many utilities have are meant to encourage conservation. We don't call it an incentive, you don't get anything back, but it's a conservation signal. If you're going to pay more for water use in the higher tiers. And tiered rates are the subject of the San Juan Capistrano litigation, and we're all very attached to our tiered rate structures, so we hope nothing happens, no adverse decisions come down. But as our water use has declined over the last few years, the conservation signal in our tiered rates has kind of faded out because people are generally already down in the lower tiers. So, and this is a picture of. This is easier to see in your sheets, I think, but this is our for 2 fiscal years, or for the red lines represent our bill distribution in fiscal 2014. So you're looking at a histogram of the number of bills for each at each level of number of units. So our total bills for this year were about 37. We send out about 37,000 bills. Well, these are residential, so it's probably fewer than that. But this is how they're distributed. Our median use is about 12 year-round. Summer 15. The median winter use is about 9 units bi-monthly. So our current tiers are 8 units. Tier 1 goes to 8 units. Tier 2 goes to 25. Tier 3 goes to 40, and above 40 is Tier 4. And you can see how few bills we have in Tier 4. Tier 4 really is not. There's so little billing in Tier 4 right now. So what the rate consultants suggested was that we adjust our bi-monthly tiers to 4, 16, and 30. So that renews our conservation signal. The blue lines are the estimated number of bills in each of those tiers. So what tends to happen when you change tiers and people pay more, basically, there's somebody using 20 units, for instance, is right now paying for 12 Tier 2 units, and under this adjustment would pay for 16 Tier 2 units. So that tends to, as people use less, as the conservation, as they respond to the conservation signal, the distribution tends to shift down, and that's what the blue lines show. so that's just an estimate. But that's what the rate consultants have basically come up with. And they'll be here in May to discuss their work in more detail and answer questions about this. But basically, changing the tier rates would provide an incentive for people to conserve more.
Dave, it also seems to me that the other advantage of that addresses the issue that was brought to our attention, well, it's been brought to our attention a lot, I imagine, but came loud and clear during the last 218 public hearing, when we had folks who were saying we're on fixed incomes and we're not used to a whole lot of water, but your rate increase is going to hurt us. And we've all been concerned about it, we've all talked about it, we've all been told basically there was no legal way of pulling out a group and saying senior citizens or people with brown hair or whatever the group is gets a different rate than the rest. And this is a way of addressing that I think is...
Well, yeah, we'll get to that we have a suggestion in that regard we'll get to in just a minute here. But yeah, that's one of the things we have thought about as we looked at various alternatives for restructuring how we distribute our revenue requirement between fixed and variable charges. We looked at, for instance, increasing a surcharge on the base charge to recover the impact of the drought, something like a drought surcharge. And we decided against that because a surcharge on the base charge, the more we increase the base charge, the more we affect the folks at the lowest end of our, at lowest end of our consumption. The people in senior housing and folks like that experience the biggest percentage increase when you start to have a surcharge on the base charge. So this just, Mary did a comparison with other districts of their tier breaks, and for these proposed tier breaks would be fairly consistent with what we see in other districts. So you can double the ones in the monthly billing cycle columns. And probably a lot of districts are also looking at changing their tiers for similar reasons. So, you want to talk about this?
Okay. So our proposal is based on our discussions with the consultants, is that we'd like to change our residential tier breakpoints as you're seeing on the table. Tier 1, we would go, as Dave said, we would go to 4 units instead of 8. Tier 2 would be between 4 to 16 units. Tier 3, 16 to 30. Tier 4, over 30. And one of the things with noting, looking at the tiers, 67% of our customers have bi-monthly usage of less than 16 units, which you saw on that other chart as well. So, you're really, we're focusing in on doing the shift, and then you'll see how this works with our when I show you some examples. But what our proposal would be that all rates, residential and non-residential, including the base rates, would increase 27%, except for Tier 1 residential. And the Tier 1 would remain the same as it is today.
The consumption rate.
Consumption rate.
All base rates would go up 27%. Tier 1 would remain at its current, Tier 1 rate would remain at its current level.
Yeah. And again, we, saying that because we want to reward customers at the lowest end, so.
So that answers the question that you were asking, and that people have asked us constantly. We've conserved, but then you're punishing us with higher rates. I mean, this is a small recognition, but a recognition nonetheless that the folks, every customer would pay less for Tier 1 units, but the folks whose usage is all in Tier 1 would get the biggest would get the biggest break.
So this shows what the impact would be. The rates in what you're seeing in green are our current rates. So our base rate today is $40.13. What we have going toward the right are sample bi-monthly bills, which are the base plus usage charges. So if you're a 3-unit customer, your bill will be $59.78. If you're an 8-unit customer, you have a $92 bill today. Under our new proposed rates, the base would go up to $50.97. But with having the Tier 1 rates holding constant, what you're going to see is that the increase for customers at the lower end of usage is below, actually, for 3 and 5, you're below 20, you're at 18%. And 23% for using 8 units. So you're not getting the, total impact of the 27%. And the customers who are the high users are getting a larger, increase than the 27%. So we're spreading it and keeping, rewarding the lower end users, so. The other, and then in yellow, what you can see is what would be your, the average increase for the bi-monthly bill. So every 2 months, the 3-unit customer will pay $10.84 more, 5 units, $13.45. So, you get the feel of what the increases would be for each level. And the other piece that we put into this chart is really what is our cost per gallon, and just for fun. So we have, if you're on the low end, your average cost per gallon, excluding the base fee, is going to be $0.0088 cents.
Dollars.
Dollars.
It's 8/10 of a penny for a gallon of water. The
Consumption
best quality
charge.
water
Yeah.
in California.
So-
8/10 of a penny.
Even at the highest consumption levels, it's still less than 2 cents. So
Even if you add in the base charge, at the highest level, does it even become 2 cents a gallon?
Yeah, it's low. I had that. It's like 2 or 3 cents.
I mean, to me, it's phenomenal when you think about what that really truthfully means, that gallon jug of water, at the highest rate for 3 cents. It's just unbelievable. I mean, truthfully unbelievable.
So that's just one way to come at a solution for this. There are alternatives, but we could go for a higher rate increase. That's not going to be very popular. There are also ways of making the rate increase lower. We think that if we did this, it would be a good solution. It would put the district in a better position to deal with all of this uncertainty that we face and the drought, and that it would do that while favoring the customers at the lowest end. They'd be favored in that they would have a rate increase that's only 2/3 of the overall average, approximate overall average rate increase. So it'd still get a hit, but not as big of a hit as everyone. I don't think there's any water customer who believes rates won't go up this year. I think that everyone recognizes the position that we're in, and that there's not likely to be any change in the near future. And with that, we'll answer any questions you might have. And I would like to express our appreciation to Directors Coverdell and Glassberg, who, as the Finance Committee, spent over 2 hours with us yesterday and gave us some really good feedback on these ideas and what we had put together for them. One of the suggestions was cut out some of the detail. We've really looked at this in pretty elaborate detail. So if you wanted to, if there were any alternatives you'd like to explore, we could do that. We could do that now. But we could also do it next time around. We've looked at different combinations of rate increases and tier breaks, and we've spent quite a bit of time with the rate consultants. So underneath this, behind this suggestion, there's quite a bit of looking at alternatives, and the Finance Committee helped us focus it a bit yesterday.
Anyone have any questions, comments?
You know, I got a comment. I think I really appreciate seeing it presented this way, because I think a lot of people tend to go off the deep end when they see high percentage changes without really applying it to what it means in dollars and cents. And I totally agree with you that for what people are paying for the quality of water that they're getting and the service, it's phenomenal, I think. So, and yeah, we're gonna have to bite the bullet.
Hey, look at, what do we spend on a bottle of water at a convenience store, a little one? And we do it for a whole lot less than we deliver it to your house.
We save you the indignity of having to recycle the plastic.
Yeah.
I did have one question. When you looked at that chart that showed the non-residential uses, if you were to lay the residential on top of that, I mean, where does that compare? How does the use for irrigation and agriculture compare to residential uses?
Let me see if I can find
It's
one of these.
No, it's the one before.
It's the line.
The line,
Yeah.
this
The
one.
line one.
That one.
Yeah.
That one.
Okay. What's the question
So
again?
residential is above where the irrigation and agriculture lines fall.
Right, way above. So residential is about 30 million gallons a month. So it would be
Yeah.
much higher on the scale.
The chart is, I think, hidden in.
Oh, do we have residential? Yeah, we have, there's, Mary made another one with residential. Is this one?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. That's what this is.
Oh, no, that's not it. That's,
Water, okay, I'm sorry. Water production,
it's probably before the other chart.
this one. Okay, that's it. So that gives you an idea of the relative scale.
Right.
Residential's the green.
Yeah. Yeah, that is helpful.
I'm sorry, total's the green. Residential is blue. And then the total of non-residential is the red. So total non-residential generally about 40%, residential generally about 60%.
So I guess my question is, I know we're focusing a lot on the priority CIP projects as being residential in nature. But the question I have is, wouldn't there be more value too in actually going with recycled water to cut down on the demand?
Well, we
We'd
haven't.
be focusing on non-residential at that point.
The only, well, there's a question of how much demand would there be for recycled water at a given quality and cost level. If recycled water is limited to the golf course, golf courses' use of our water has ranged in the last few years between 2 million gallons a year, in a good year for them, and about 25 million gallons at its peak. So, that's 25 million gallons is significant, but not huge in our overall picture. And it doesn't, recycled water doesn't offer us any near-term solution. I think our current crisis will, or our drought, I shouldn't call it a crisis, will bring some focus back to, a recycled water project. I think it can't help but do that. So hopefully we'll be able to reopen that discussion and have one down the road. But there's not, for use limited to the golf course, there's not a huge, it doesn't make a huge dent in our demand.
And we're excluding the cemetery just because of the pumping, the cost of pumping it?
Well, I think I think they have to look at it. We know that building a pipeline all the way to the cemetery would be a pretty expensive proposition, but they need water for the long term. They're there.
Perpetuity.
Yeah, in perpetuity. They have an ambitious development plan, a lot of which requires irrigation. Even as they get more efficient, they're going to have a continuing need for water. I mean, at least that's what they say. And eventually, as our demand in the district grows, assuming it does, we won't have any water to supply the cemetery. So that's something we need to work on with the cemetery to, come up with solutions for the future. Right now, we have the only infrastructure capable of delivering water up there. They haven't been successful in developing any water source on site. They drilled a 1,000-foot well and got 3 gallons a minute or 10 gallons a minute, something like that.
$400.
Yeah, they drilled almost all the way to sea level and didn't really come up with any water.
Can you have a comment?
Yeah, on the recycled water, there's a project sitting ready to go if we can get people motivated about it, because the golf course has already stated that they're willing to bear the expenses, and but getting an agreement with the groups that are involved in that, I mean, I'm telling you, I was optimistic, and optimism has gone quickly down into the gutter. I mean, it's just more talk and less action than any group of people I've ever seen in my life. It's scary.
What can we as the board do to
Not one thing.
Not one thing.
Well, we could spend a lot of money creating agreements and go present them, but until there's a willingness on the other side to actually participate in real, live, active discussion of what the terms might be, you might as well just drive down the highway and throw money out the window. And it's sad because it's all sitting right there. And it really helps so many people. What it does, from a budgetary standpoint, it's horrible because it takes water revenue out of our budget, more water revenue out. So if we're talking about the negative side, it's not a plus.
But wouldn't we be distributing it?
Well, we get to buy it and resell it, but the person who's willing to help finance the project has put sort of a budget cap. And the budget cap may not produce income in the beginning. It would produce the facilities, and it would go forever. So there'll come a time when it would have a positive value, but in the beginning, yeah. Should we do it? You better believe it. We should do it as quickly as we can. We should have done it already. And, it should be pumped right now down to the golf course, and it would help those people out. And it would help Sam out. It would help the environment out. I mean, it just helps everyone. So that's probably a really good reason not to do it. And I mean, I don't mean to be sarcastic, but it's just, you should interact in the process. It's really, it's so frustrating. But it's a great project. It's a wonderful thing. We really looked at scenarios with regard to this budget. We looked at, 8 different ways to apply rate increases. And we spent quite a bit of time. I think we were not thorough, but we were, I think, involved. And this looks like a pretty cool way to do it. Ugly numbers, not going to be a fun process, but I think it actually gets the people that are, maybe using more water than they need to be to pay attention to that. And I think it keeps the people that are really at risk financially. There's a recovery in the economy, but I don't know that all levels have recovered, especially people that are closer to baseline living. And so for one thing, it's great. We talked a lot about how much money does this district need in reserve, and I think that that's something that we have to be really more serious about. I mean, it looks like we have reserves, but I don't know what the current value of the district is, the improvements, $60 million. And if you assume that there's a life expectancy and depreciation, how long before we have to, come up with $60 million at those future, numbers, right, with inflation? And we haven't seen inflation, but, I don't know how many of you remember back in the late 80s, but it was pretty radical. People were buying houses at 18% interest on, mortgages, and we don't know. But I think that's the biggest fear for me is, when we use some of our reserves for rate stabilization, that kind of concept, or we use it to offset a shortage in our budget, that makes me nervous. Because if we had penalties, in a given period, we've got to write those checks and they've got to clear the bank. So those bills could be, our bills to SFPUC could be huge and immediate. And I don't know if banks loan you money on that basis,
You shouldn't.
Yeah. So it's, and I think we're a really solid district. I think we've been very fiscally sound for a long time. But I'd sure hate to see it go the other way,
Yeah, I'd like to thank the Finance District for their, last-minute input, for coming in the day before a meeting and putting in your time. I do agree, our reserves are certainly on the low side. And, we're already reaching into low reserves, and we don't know what the future holds for us. So those reserves need to get built up. And you can see we have some projects out there that can pay some immediate dividends, and for us not to move forward on those would be short-selling the district. And we did put a lot of money into a new water treatment plant, and let's get that water out of the plant and into our system, so we have some infrastructure that will allow us to do that. So that's some really critical infrastructure. So I think it makes a good case for a rate increase. It may be as high as proposed here to put some money back in reserves and keep moving forward so we can keep producing water locally, when it's available. And that we don't know, what it's going to look like next year or the year after, local production, and then we go into the 475 scenario, and then we're really going to need those reserves. So no matter how you slice it, no matter what happens, we're going to need those reserves. So thank you for that. The only thing missing, I guess I could back into them, is the per unit rates, proposed unit rates. How much each unit will cost at each tier. You could back into them, but.
You have those numbers somewhere?
Not
I
on
know
there.
tier 1, 655.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And then the next one, I think, is 722, but that's before the rate increase, so.
Yeah, because then I could figure, because right now my bill kind of falls, I have about 9 to 11 units, and all of us here have water bills too, so we're not just passing this onto the rate. Each and every person here, we're all gonna pay these prices. So thanks for the good work, and I hope the public, took the time, and certainly I see the camera focused on that. I hope that public takes the time to digest this, and if you have any more questions, I would imagine every one of these PowerPoints that we saw today is on our website.
We'll put them on the website, yeah.
Yeah. So what we want is a good informed customer, so they understand really why we're doing this, and that is our goal, is to inform our customer base on really why this may very well be necessary to raise our rates to this degree. So I think a pretty good case was made tonight, so thank you, thanks. Operations, Joe?
Well, big highlight was we ran Denniston every day in March.
Yeah, that guy has a big
As
gold
high as we
star
could.
here on my,
Yeah, so unfortunately though, the farmer is experiencing the drought too, and he is started to irrigate already, which, we were hoping to go through June at Denniston, but it looks like we're gonna barely get through May. Because the water in the reservoir is already dropping. But we're plugging away as much as we can. So if there's anything else in my report, I'd be willing to. I have a question.
yeah, I have a couple
Entertain
too,
any
but
answers.
Arnie, did you want?
I had one question, Joe. You had a March 4th meeting on the El Dorado Pipeline final phase, we're calling it now, with the city. I was just
Yes.
wondering if you could give us more information about that meeting.
This was, we talked more about our proposal to horizontally drill, and we basically let them know that we're not going to be part of this new bridge project that they're proposing, and that, we were going to drill under Pellicita, or under the creek, over at Menidas.
Was it received in a positive?
They're all right, they're okay.
Yeah, we met with the city manager, the community development director, the planning director, and the city engineer. So it was really a good meeting. It gave us a chance to tell them why we're doing, what we plan to do. We talked about the permitting for the project we're contemplating. We talked about how our thinking had changed about this emergency bypass pipeline. Right now, we have, should the pipeline on the bridge break or spring a leak, we have all of the fittings and pipe that we need to put in an emergency bypass stored in a container up at Nunes. We think we could do it probably within 24 hours. We could get one in place. So we just let the city know that rather than go through a whole CDP process for something we might not do, if that pipe breaks, we're going to be in there saying, we need an emergency coastal development permit. Coastal Act allows for that. It doesn't have all this process that, but we don't think we're going to need to do it. We think, since we're pressing ahead so aggressively with the permanent solution, that it's likely we'll be able to get that in place within the reasonably expected lifetime of the pipe on the bridge. So that's we're kind of crossing our fingers and inspecting the pipe weekly for any issues. So it was a good opportunity to really let the city know what we're going to do.
Good.
So they're not thinking that they need to coordinate with us on the Main Street Bridge project. They can do that on their own.
Thanks. I'm excited to see we're going to try slip lining on 92.
Yes. The problems associated with the pipeline around Nebbia Winery can be quite impactful. I mean, the collateral damage on 92 could be severe.
Yeah, so
And the, you know,
try
and then
this
the-
technology, I think will be interesting.
And the impact on Pelicitos Creek would be, you know, is always a worry to us. So we thought this would be I mean, entire 92 really should be slip lined. It should be reduced. But
That's
this is
how
a
I'm
good
viewing
pilot.
this, as a good pilot program. Yeah.
Yes.
Get a
because-
handle on numbers.
Yeah, the thing, it's not, I mean, you got to take the pipe out of service, but there are people downstream that still need the water. One of the larger, I mean, getting the pipe slip line through there, the technology is good. There's plenty of it. There's a couple of companies that are very good at it, can do it quite quickly. The challenge here is to build a bypass, a temporary bypass around the section of pipe that we're going to slip line.
So, you know, we're thinking about that, you know, that's gonna be the big challenging thing.
Yeah, no, it'd be interesting. to
So I
watch
turn
it
this over
develop.
to Jim Teeter, because it is gonna be an expensive process, and we need a very a thorough bidding documents on this, request for proposals.
And what did the SFPUC have to say on Stone Dam Pipeline?
They want us to, they really want us to be successful on this. Their hands are somewhat tied by any major project will trigger all sorts of environmental scrutiny, permitting of the endangered species, et cetera. But they're willing to allow us to improve the present temporary pipeline. We're having problems with air, and it's because of the location where that pipe is tapped onto their pipe. So we've come up with an idea that if we could tap in near the bottom of this pipe rather than at the 9 o'clock position, we're going to tap in at maybe the 6 or the 7. Well, there's already a blow off at the 6 o'clock position, the bottom of the pipe. And we feel that the air presently is being entrained by when our demand is high or it increases too quickly and their level in their pipe drops too quickly, it vortexes and starts sucking air, essentially. So if we change the location of our intake to the bottom and bury the pipe across the present road up there, it's basically the end of their road, and then onto the ancient road that is presently the path that we go up and down from our property up to theirs, we may find an effective solution. This may allow us to increase our rates up to, we're hoping, we historically had been going up to 1,600 gallons per minute. Right now, if we go over 900 gallons per minute, we start getting in trouble. We're hoping to get up above 1,600, maybe 19, I don't know.
Wow, that'd be great.
Yeah, and that would allow us to stay on Pilocitos for a longer period of time, as long as they have water up there, and avoid the high energy charges at Crystal Springs that depleted that budget terribly.
The temporary is becoming more the long-term solution, but that's good. Yeah. So
Yes.
That's, yeah.
So the moral of the story is they're willing to work with us and as much as they can.
Oh, there's finally some good news tonight.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll take it any way we can get it. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
Good, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay. Okay. Where are we at, guys? Anything else here?
The party's over.
I
Parties
just
are-
wanted to share, I had an interesting experience today in San Francisco. I think I may have mentioned this in our study session. My son lives down in the Cow Hollow area and across from a fire station. And they have lots of field trips. The little ones come.
Oh, they turned the hose on?
And they give him the experience of turning on the hose. And he was outraged. A little sympathy for his dad on the waterboard. Right? So we happened to be there having lunch with him today, and he says, "Look, they're doing it again." So we all run to his bedroom window and looking out. And sure enough, here's 20 kids and the firefighter's down there with his hose, and every kid gets to get up, and they open the hose for about 10 seconds, and it's shooting out in the middle of the street. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? So we took a video and several stills, which I then went on the fire department website, and who do you send it to? They got 1 million people you can contact. So I just picked the fire chief's office and just sent a little email, very respectful, and just said, hey, I thought you might be interested in these pictures, and we've been in a drought for 4 years, guys, and what a great opportunity for the firefighters to talk to the kids about responsible use of water rather than shooting it off into the street. Surprisingly, I got a response right away. Within an hour, we had a response from the scout saying, you're absolutely right, and we'll be sending a memo out to all the firefighters.
Oh, poor kid.
What a killjoy. Hope your house doesn't catch on fire.
It helps being an old school guy, because I don't care, but you know, all these parents out there taking pictures of their kids shooting off the fire hose, and oh jeez, what a killjoy, but.
All right, no more of those stories, we're adjourned, thank you.
I just mentioned John.
That's funny.